I call this meeting of the Property Tax Division to order pursuant to Rule 10.01. The first order of business is that we will need to a roll call to determine who's present. The clerk will now take the roll.
Chair Joachim.
Present.
Chair Joachim, present. Vice Chair Greenman. Vice Chair Greenman. Representative Hertas.
Here.
Representative Hertas, present. Representative Anderson.
Here.
Representative Anderson, present. Representative Becker-Finn.
Here.
Representative Becker-Finn, present. Representative Fisher.
Representative Fisher, present.
Representative Fisher, present. Representative Gomez.
Present.
Representative Gomez, present. Representative Green.
Here.
Representative Green, present. Representative Hassan. Representative Hassan. Representative Marquardt.
Marquardt, present.
Representative Marquardt, present. Representative Mortensen.
Present.
Representative Mortensen, present. Representative Plowski.
Present.
Representative Plowski, present. And Representative Torkelson.
Present.
Representative Torkelson, present. Chair Joachim, quorum is present.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. So thank you, everyone. I want to make note that all the committee documents for today have been sent to members and are on the committee page on the House website for those of you who want to follow along at home. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from January 13th. Representative Gomez, have you had a chance to review the minutes?
I have, Madam Chair. I'd like to move their approval.
Thank you. Does anyone have any question about the minutes? If you do, just use the raise hand function or *6 to unmute if you're on the phone. Seeing none, we'll move on to the vote, and this is a voice vote, so members, please briefly unmute yourself when you vote. All those in favor of approving the January 13 minutes, say aye.
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 All those opposed? The motion is approved and the minutes are adopted. The main agenda item for today is the House Research and House Fiscal Staff Overview presentation of the Minnesota property tax system. This is going to include many of the different timelines that property taxes entail, as well as different property tax credits and state aid programs. We're going to take some breaks in between the presentations so folks can ask questions in certain issue areas. So I'll start out with Ms. Schill. Could you please introduce yourself and start whenever you are ready?
Good afternoon, Chair Joachim and members. For the record, my name is Kathy Schill, House Fiscal Staff. Today we have for you an overview of property taxes. And as we get started, let me make a comment. We have two documents for reference available on the website or in your packets. The first is the 2021 Property Tax Briefing, which is a copy of the compilation of slides of today's presentation. The second document is the 2021 Property Taxes Handout. And this is a collection of reference documents that provides more subject matter detail on topics presented in today's slides. So let's begin. In Minnesota, the governance of property taxes is a shared responsibility between the state and local governments. While property taxes are a mainstay of local government finances, Minnesota's property tax system is highly centralized at the state level. Beginning with Minnesota Statutes 270C.85, state law gives the Commissioner of Revenue the responsibility to oversee key elements of Minnesota's property tax laws, many of which will be discussed this year in committee. So next slide, please. So slide 2 is an outline of today's property tax presentation. I will begin with a bird's eye overview of state and local tax revenues and a review of fiscal resources. Next, Jared Swanson from House Research will discuss components of the property tax system, including its administration, design, and sample property tax calculations. The third section covers state-funded property tax relief programs. Mr. Swan and I will talk about major state aids and credits, and then Sean Williams will discuss property tax refund programs. And the last two segments are local government finance tools. Alexandra Hagler will review local sales taxes and tax increment financing provisions. Next slide, please. So how much revenue do state and local taxes generate in 1 year? This chart summarizes all state and local taxes collected in Minnesota for fiscal year 2020. The size of the entire pie of state tax revenues totals $37.4 billion. About $26.7 billion, or 60%, is collected from state tax sources, and $10.7 billion, or 40%, is from local tax sources. Now, looking at the 5 pieces of pie here, the light blue section is individual income taxes, generating the most revenue at $12.1 billion, or 32% of the total. The orange area is property taxes at $10.5 billion, or 28% of the total. Statewide sales taxes, the gray area, bring in $7.4 billion, or 20% of the total. And other state taxes, the yellow area, this includes corporate franchise tax, gas tax, excise taxes, collect $6.4 billion, or about 17%. And the last skinny dark blue slice is other local taxes, mostly sales taxes, which generates the remaining 3% at just under $1 billion per year. Next slide, please. So how are state and local tax collections changing over time? A quick measure is to look back at income, sales, and property taxes over the last 10 years. The bar graph here shows revenues from each of these big 3 taxes for fiscal years 2009, 2014, and 2019. Each tax type is a different color. Blue is for income taxes, yellow for sales taxes, and the gray for property taxes. Choose a color and then following the bars from left to right. You'll notice that each progression illustrates strong revenue growth over the decade for each one of these revenue sources. As these revenues grow, so does the size of the pie in each given year. But there's one thing that's not easily seen here. As the size of the pie of state and local tax collections grows, the revenues from these big three sources as a portion of the total collections is gradually shrinking. In fiscal 19, these 3 big taxes were 81.2% of the total. In fiscal 2009, 10 years earlier, they accounted for 83% of the total. And if we look back even further to 2001, they accounted for approximately 85% of total state and local tax collections. Next slide. Bills that change tax laws require analysis for their potential impact on tax collections. Here are the fiscal resources that we use in division and in tax committee. Revenue estimates. This is the most common tool used. All bills heard in committee will have a revenue estimate, which is an analysis that discusses changes in state tax revenues or state expenditures for property tax relief programs are proposed in a bill. A revenue estimate identifies any proposed changes in a bill by making a comparison to the most recent economic forecast. Official revenue estimates are prepared by the State Tax and Property Tax Research Division in the Department of Revenue. Revenue estimates are reviewed by nonpartisan fiscal staff for each hearing to check if it matches the intent of the bill and for fiscal impact. Revenue estimates can be prepared for confidential estimates. Perhaps you'd be formulating a bill and don't know its impact. Please ask fiscal staff, either me or my colleague Cynthia Templin, for help. Analysis remained confidential until bill language is formally introduced. The next tool is a fiscal note. A fiscal note estimates the administrative cost of a program or operations of a state agency. It is different from a revenue estimate that's prepared by the Department of Revenue, in the fact that a fiscal note is prepared by one or more state agencies impacted by the bill, and the fiscal note process is administered by the Legislative Budget Office. Sometimes a bill can have both a revenue estimate and a fiscal note. If you're uncertain about the revenue or cost impact of your bill, or you need assistance, once again, please ask me or my colleague, Cynthia Templin. One more thing. Generally speaking, most taxes and tax relief programs are based on the calendar year or payable year, which spans from January 1 to December 31st, while the state budget is done on a fiscal year basis, starting on July 1 and ending on June 30th of the following year. Revenue estimates and fiscal notes reflect fiscal year impacts for use in the budget process, while other documents, even parts of this presentation, show certain calendar year impacts of a program. Now, the third item on the list is local impact notes. Local impact notes estimate the local government or school district fiscal impact of proposed legislation. It can be requested only by the chair or ranking minority of the Taxes or Ways and Means Committee in the House. LBO coordinates the process with input from local officials, which may take many weeks to complete depending on the complexity and the response from local officials. And last, our legislative tracking sheets. Tracking sheets are prepared by fiscal staff to show a collection of cost information from proposed changes in a bill. Done for the governor's budget recommendations, and they're done for omnibus bills in each the division and tax committee. Tracking sheets show baseline expenditures from the most recent economic forecast and proposed changes. The next forecast update will be the February forecast released at the beginning of March. The division spreadsheet tracks property tax refunds, aids and credits, and other property tax relief items. The division report eventually merges with the tax revenue spreadsheet to make one multi-page tracking sheet. Tracking sheets are posted to each committee website and on the fiscal analysis webpage. And now I will turn it over to Mr. Swanson for some information about House research and the discussion on property tax administration.
Madam Chair and members, Jared Swanson with House Research. Before we get into the property tax administration information, I just want to briefly mention some of the services that the House research analysts on this committee can provide to members of the committee. So we are nonpartisan staff, and we work with members from both parties on a confidential basis. We can provide the committee members with legal and policy analysis on any legislative ideas that the members may have. We can draft bills and amendments for members. We prepare the bill summaries for committee hearings. We also have the capability to model income tax, property tax, and state aid proposals. And additionally, there are publications on our website that are of general interest to many of the topics that we cover in this committee and many of the topics that you'll see in this presentation today. So we're going to take a look at sort of an overview of property taxes. And what I'm going to cover on the next few slides will include how property taxes are administered and calculated. We'll go over some of the features of the property tax system in Minnesota, and we'll talk about how the state provides some property tax relief to taxpayers. So beginning with property tax administration, there are a number of people who are involved in the administration of property taxes. And we'll start with county and local assessors. So the assessors value property and determine each property's classification. They also send valuation notices out to property taxpayers. The county auditors maintain official property tax records. They calculate the tax rates and tax amounts, and they also prepare truth and taxation notices. We'll talk about these notices a little bit more in a few slides. County treasurers actually distribute the tax back to the local taxing jurisdictions like counties, cities, towns, and school districts. They are involved in a process for tax forfeiture, and they collect the deed and mortgage registry tax. Lastly, for this slide, the Department of Revenue is also involved in the administration of property taxes. There are some types of property that are not assessed by the county and local assessors. So things like utility property or pipeline property actually get assessed by the Department of Revenue. The department also certifies assessments to the counties, and they administer the solar energy and wind production tax. Next slide, please. Taxing authorities are involved in the administration of property tax. So these would be the entities that actually have the authority to levy the property tax and include counties, cities, townships, school districts, and special taxing districts. There are boards of appeal and equalization that exist at the local, county, and state level, and these boards are in place to give property taxpayers a chance to appeal their evaluations. The tax court is an executive branch court with statewide jurisdiction that also provides avenues for property taxpayers to challenge their property taxes. So for example, if a taxpayer were to disagree with their valuation for a given year, they could first discuss this with the assessor. They could appeal to the local boards of appeal and equalization, and if they still weren't satisfied, they could appeal to the tax court. Additionally, the taxpayer can sort of skip all of those first steps and appeal directly to the tax court. Next slide, please. So the property tax cycle in Minnesota actually spans 2 calendar years. So this slide shows the calendar for property taxes payable in 2021, and this cycle actually began back on January 2nd of 2020. So on January 2nd is when all of the properties in the state have a value assigned to them. In March, those valuation notices are sent out to the taxpayers. There's a process in the spring of the assessment year for taxpayers to appeal these valuations. And then in September, the local jurisdictions set their preliminary levies. Sometimes we call these truth and taxation levies or T&T levies. November, the local jurisdictions send out notices to property taxpayers, giving them an idea of what their property taxes are going to be in the following calendar year. And these are based off of those preliminary levies that were set in September. Finally, in December, the local jurisdictions certify those levies. So they actually choose a final amount that they're going to levy in the next year. And in January of the following year, those tax rates and tax amounts actually get computed. In March, the statements go out and first half property tax payments are due in May. Most taxpayers will pay their second half payment in October, with the exception of ag properties, which pay their second half payments in November. Next slide, please. So the previous slide showed that there are 3 different statements that get mailed to taxpayers each year. This slide just has a little bit more information about each of those notices. The valuation notice, again, is sent out in the early spring that shows the classification and the market value of each property. The truth and taxation or T&T notices get sent out in November, and those are just notices that show what the taxpayer can expect to pay in the following year based on the preliminary levies that have been set by the local jurisdictions. These T&T notices also have information about public hearings that will be hosted by the local jurisdictions. And these hearings are designed to give the public a chance to weigh in on the levies that the counties, cities, and other local taxing jurisdictions plan on levying in the following year. And then finally, the property tax statement is sent out by March 31st, and it shows the final amount of tax due on the property, and it gives a detailed breakdown of how much money is going to each taxing authority. Next slide, please. So the next 3 slides, we're going to take a look at how property taxes are actually calculated. At the most basic level, the property tax is determined by a jurisdiction's rate multiplied by the value of each property within that jurisdiction. So to determine the rate within a given jurisdiction, you take the levy divided by the tax base within that jurisdiction. So for example, if you wanted to know the tax rate in Martin County, you would take the levy that Martin County has set for a given year and divide that levy by the value of all of the property within the county. What's unique about Minnesota's property tax system is that there are actually 2 different types of tax bases that could be that taxes can be levied on. Meaning some jurisdictions actually do this process twice and apply 2 different rates to some of the properties within their jurisdiction. We're going to talk about both of those tax rates on the next 2 slides. So the first tax base is the referendum market value tax base. And this tax base is only used for school operating referendum levies. However, there was a time where this tax base was used for voter approved levies more generally. So there are still some of these referendum levies that have not been fully paid off, and a few that had been approved before 2008 are still being levied on the referendum market value tax base. So referendum market value is simply equal to the market value of each property, and this tax base excludes some tax types, including agricultural land and cabins. Next slide, please. So the second tax base is the primary tax base that's actually used to calculate property taxes, and this is known as the net tax capacity tax base. This base includes all property types, and each property's net tax capacity is calculated by multiplying the value of the property times its class rate. This process allows for property tax burdens to be distributed differently, shifting tax onto or away from certain property types. On the next 3 slides, we'll take a look at the impact of this classification process. Next slide, please. So this slide shows some, not all, but some of the classifications that we have in our property tax system. Note that there are some property types that, like residential homesteads, for example, that have 2 different class rates. So they have a lower rate on the value of the property up to a certain threshold, and then a higher rate on the value of the property over that threshold. So for example, residential homesteads, which I'll note also include agricultural homesteads. This is something that we often refer to as the house, garage, and 1 acre, or the HGA. This is basically saying that, you know, egg homes are treated the same as residential homes for property tax purposes. So a residential homestead or an egg homestead, just the house, garage, and 1 acre, has a class rate of 1% on a home valued under $500,000. But if the home was valued over $500,000, it would have a class rate of 1% on the value up to $500,000, and then a class rate of 1.25% on the remaining value over that $500,000 threshold. The main takeaway from this table is just that the higher a class rate, the more of the property's value that gets included in the property tax calculation, meaning the property will pay a relatively higher share of the overall tax. Next slide. And this slide just shows a few more common property tax classifications. Again, this is not a list of all of the classifications. This is just a few more of the common ones. A thing to note is that some property types, like apartments, just have a flat rate on the entire value of the property, whereas other properties like cabins, which is the seasonal rec 4C, have sort of that 2-tiered class rate system like homesteads do. All right, next slide. So the effect of this classification system can be seen on slide 16. In this example, there are 5 different property types. Each property has the same value. So in this example, it's $200,000. If there were no classification system in place, then all property tax, all property types would be taxed the same, and the gross tax on each property type would be equal. Instead, the property tax system in Minnesota has class rates that distribute the burden differently, shifting tax onto classes with higher rates and shifting tax away from classes with lower rates. So you can see property types like agricultural homesteads or residential homesteads have lower rates, and as a result, they tend to have lower taxes. Properties like commercial industrial properties or apartments, like the rental properties, tend to have higher rates, and as a result, bear a higher share of the overall burden. Next slide. So in addition to classification rates, there's another feature of the state's property tax system that shifts the burden among property types, and that feature is known as a market value exclusion. There are a couple of different types of market value exclusions. I'm just going to highlight one here, and that's the homestead market value exclusion, which is sort of the largest, most widely applied market value exclusion. So the homestead market value exclusion is open to all residential homesteads. And again, this includes the house, garage, and 1 acre of agricultural homesteads. And what this does is it just excludes a portion of the home's value from taxation. The exclusion amount is dependent on the overall value of the home. So you can see from the chart here that the exclusion amount increases as a home's value increases, and it maxes out for homes valued at around $76,000. So the exclusion amount here is about $30,000 for homes valued at $76,000, meaning if you had a home that was valued at $76,000, it's really going to be taxed more like it was worth $40,000. The exclusion phases out as the home's value increases, and it's completely phased out for homes valued at about $414,000. And next slide, please. So you can see the effects of all of these classification rates and valuation exclusions in this chart here. So there are property types like agricultural homesteads and residential homesteads that account for a higher share of market value than what they actually pay in property taxes. And then there are other property types like apartments or a commercial industrial property that pay a higher share of property taxes compared to their overall share of market value. So again, if we didn't have the classification system or market value exclusions, each property type's 2 bars would be the same. So for residential homesteads, the blue and the yellow bar, for example, would be equal. But the classification system and the valuation exclusions that we have in place shift burdens among property types. Next slide, please. This next slide just shows where property taxes are going. So the data included in this slide is for property taxes that were paid in 2020. So just over $11 billion was paid in property taxes in 2020. You can see a vast majority of that goes to counties, school districts, and cities. So that's over 85% of property taxes paid to those 3 jurisdictions. Other local jurisdictions that receive property taxes are special taxing districts and townships. You can see they receive a much smaller share of the overall property tax at 4% and 2% respectively. Additionally, there is a state property tax that is levied on commercial, industrial, and seasonal recreational property. This accounts for 7% of all property taxes that were paid in 2020. Next slide, please. So this slide shows where Minnesota ranks among other states in terms of its overall tax burden, and the measure used here is effective tax rate. So this is the amount of tax paid divided by the value of the property, and this information comes from a report that's put out this year by the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy along with the Minnesota Center for Fiscal Excellence. And what the report does is it compares property taxes in the largest city in each state, and then it also compares property taxes among a rural community within each state. So the ranking for urban cities that you see here is based on property taxes paid in Minneapolis, and you can see that the for property taxes paid by homes, Minnesota's about middle of the pack, a little bit higher for homes valued at $300,000. For a $1 million commercial property, Minnesota is ranked 10th in the nation. For a $1 million commercial property, that ranking drops down to 24th. And then for a $600,000 apartment in urban cities, Minnesota is ranked 21st in the nation. So the rural city that is used in the study for Minnesota is Glencoe. And you can see that the home rankings are comparable, a little bit higher on that low valued $150,000 home. $1 million commercial property is ranked 6th in the nation, and the industrial property is 14th. Lastly, for among rural cities, the $600,000 apartment is ranked 28th. So first, on this scale, first would be you sort of have the highest effective tax rates in the nation, whereas 50th would be the lowest. Next slide, please. So I mentioned a few slides back that there is a state general tax. This slide gives a little bit of information on the state general levy in 2021. So the levy for this year is about $779 million. About 95% of that is paid by commercial and industrial property, and about 5% of that is paid by seasonal recreational properties. This includes things like cabins, resorts, property types like that. There have been a few changes to the state general tax in recent years. So the 2019 tax bill reduced the overall levy by $50 million, and the 2017 tax bill eliminated the annual inflationary increase in the overall levy amount that had been in place since the state general levy was first levied back in 2002. The 2017 tax bill also exempted the first $100,000 of commercial industrial market value from paying the state general tax. So this concludes sort of an overview of the administration of the property tax system. Madam Chair, I understand that this may be a good time to pause for questions before Ms. Schill talks about some of the ways the state provides property tax relief.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Swanson. First, I want to note just after we took a roll, Representative Hassan joined us, so she's here. And otherwise, members, if you can use the raise hand feature, we'll see if you have any questions so far for Ms. Schill or Mr. Swanson. And I see Representative Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question, I think, is for Mr. Swanson. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, like, I don't know if there's any state where there's front-end income sensitivity on the property taxes. I know that we introduce income sensitivity through the property tax refund and the renter's rebate, but my understanding in particular of the renters, well, first of all, is that there's a disparity there in terms of the income phase out levels for property tax refund, I think is like 120,000 or so, and the income phase out for the renter's rebate is 60,000 or so. So we're sort of inherently like, giving more relief to homeowners or those who directly pay property taxes. But my understanding, but obviously the refunds are income sensitive. And so that's sort of like this backdoor way that we introduce income sensitivity into the property tax arena. But I'm wondering if there's any way to do it up front. I think that in my community, you hear sometimes about like, someone who's, a senior on a fixed income who owns their house, but is kind of trying to like balance, so they own an asset maybe that's relatively valuable, but then the income that they're bringing in isn't really commensurate with the level of tax that they owe on the house. So yeah, just wondering if you can speak to income sensitivity on the front end of property taxes.
Mr. Swanson.
Madam Chair and members, yes, Representative Gomez, you kind of, you sort of touched on the ways that we do that, and we will get to that in this presentation. Mr. Williams is going to talk a little bit about the property tax refunds. Another way that there is at least some sort of income testing on property tax relief is through another program that we will get to eventually in these slides. That's the senior deferral program. So we'll talk a little bit about that. There is a program in place for seniors meeting certain age and income requirements to defer a portion of their property taxes. beyond those are really the two main ways. I'm not aware of, off the top of my head, of how any other state would do that, but certainly certainly the levers exist, the mechanisms exist if that was something that the legislature wanted to do, but it's not. I don't think what you're thinking of is currently in place in any way.
Representative Gomez, any follow-up?
Just sort of a comment, I guess. It was interesting to see Ms. Schill's sort of the overall pie chart and what a significant portion of state revenue is made up by sales taxes, which is the most regressive tax that we use. I think maybe excise taxes are more so, but kind of, and property taxes are also a relatively regressive kind of tax. And so, I guess overall for me, I kind of think that we should be doing everything we can to make our tax code more progressive. And I know that we have been doing that over time, but it's sort of like getting a renter's rebate or property tax refund starting in August doesn't necessarily help if you're kind of struggling throughout the year to make those payments, those quarterly property tax payments, for example, or something. So I guess it's just a comment, right? Is that, when we don't use progressive tax tools, then we ask local municipalities and school districts, counties, and cities to rely on more regressive tax tools like sales tax and property tax. And overall, I just think we need to move kind of more in the direction of greater income sensitivity, greater progressivity in our tax code. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Gomez. Representative Anderson. Representative Anderson, you have to unmute.
Thank you. Mr. Swanson, thanks, Madam Chair. And Mr. Swanson, you've explained how most levies are set. Back up in my area, there's been a lot of angst recently about the watersheds and how they set levies, and some say excessive levies. Could you briefly just discuss how watersheds, which are made up of unelected board members, go about their process of setting a levy?
Mr. Swanson.
Madam Chair, Representative Anderson, I guess, the only information that I can provide just off the top of my head would be that watershed districts are considered special taxing districts. So there are a number of different types of special taxing districts that set annual levies. They have levy authority, just like a city, a town, or a county would. But as far as the maybe giving a little bit more detail, I'd have to really get back to you on that. I don't really have much else to provide right now, but I could try to get you a little bit more information on any differences between how watersheds set their levies compared to maybe how a city or a county would approach it.
Okay, thank you. I would appreciate that.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Representative Anderson. Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Representative Jamie Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I've been thinking a lot about, sort of during this time, this last year, sort of the fuzziness that now exists as more people are working remotely, and especially for folks who have a second home or a cabin, and looking at the way that we tax those and categorize seasonal recreational property. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on this, that for properties that are categorized as seasonal recreational, they don't actually pay any property taxes to the local community. It's the state tax that they're paying. And I just wanted to clarify that, and I guess related to that, if you've seen any changes in how folks are categorizing their property with things changing in the last 10, 11 months.
Mr. Swanson.
Madam Chair, representatives, I guess the first thing I would clarify is that seasonal rec properties like cabins do still pay property taxes to the local jurisdictions. So the only difference, the only difference in terms of local taxes for seasonal rec properties would be those levies that are levied on referendum market value. So, you know, I know I mentioned that there are still some sort of old holdovers from pre-2008 that are exceptions to this, but generally speaking, those referendum market value levies are just going to be those school operating referendum levies. So the cabins don't pay that portion of the overall property tax bill, but they do still pay the rest of the tax that's levied at that local level. So they are still paying taxes to the county, city, school district, special taxing districts, township, whatever local taxing jurisdictions they're in. And then on top of that local tax, they're also paying the seasonal rec portion of the state general levy. To the second part of your question, I think you were sort of asking whether or not people are treating their cabins now as homesteads, since there's sort of been a lot of changes to how and where people work over the last few months. You know, that's something that could be happening. I would just note that there is, you know, you can only have one homestead in Minnesota. So if you had been treating your, you know, your house in Egan as your homestead and wanted to change that to your cabin somewhere, you would have to give up that homestead in Egan. So you can only have one homestead at a time. You know, it could technically, your cabin could technically be your homestead, but then your actual house couldn't be.
Representative Jamie Becker-Finn, any follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, I know that you can only have one homestead, but I'm just thinking of folks, you know, with Lakeshore, and I know that folks in my, you know, my district, so I represent suburban people, so it's not like the property in my district is seasonal recreational, but the people own seasonal recreational property up north, and just sort of thinking about how that's all going to play out as people may be trying to, you know, make the system work as best to their advantage in this kind of weird time. So thank you.
Thank you, members. I don't see any further questions. So I think our next spot is going to be about the property tax programs, if you'd like to continue.
Yeah, that would be me. Once again, Kathy Schill, House Fiscal. Slides 22 and 23 reflect major property tax relief programs. This is a quick summary of selected tax relief programs, including who benefits and how much spending is forecasted for the current year, calendar year 2020, fiscal 2021. Of the dozen or so programs listed on these two slides, more than half are in the jurisdiction of the Property Tax Division, and the rest are in the Education Finance Committee. And let's go over these. The top spender, if you will, is local government aid. That's aid going to cities at $561 million. County program aid is next at $260 million. Going down the slide, operating capital aid and local option revenue aid are both school district recipients. $88 million is for COVID small business aid. That is the aid that was passed in special session 7 last December. This goes directly to businesses. The school building bond agricultural credit at $55 million per year goes to school districts, as does the referendum equalization aid at $45 million to school districts. And then we have the agricultural market value credit at $37 million per year. This goes to all taxing jurisdictions. Next slide, please. On this slide, I'll direct you to the middle of the slide with direct payments to taxpayers. These are the two mainstay property tax refund programs. First, the homestead credit state refund is at $585 million per year. And then the renter's credit, The renter's property tax refund is at $227 million per year, and these are direct payments to individuals. And finally, at the bottom of the slide, you see the CARES Act one-time payments to local governments. This was the $838 million presentation that we gave actually just last week. One more note on this particular set of slides: of all the tax aids and credits program spending, the top 4 programs, that's local government aid, county program aid, town aid, and the property tax refund for homeowners and renters, comprise 1.6 billion, or 77% of the $2.13 billion fiscal 2021 spending. And now we'll turn to Mr. Swanson for a closer look at some of those tax aids and credits for cities and counties.
Madam Chair, members, Jared Swanson with House Research. As Ms. Schill said, we're going to take a little bit closer look at some of those property tax relief programs that she just mentioned on the last 2 slides, starting with local government aid, or LGA. So LGA is a general purpose aid that's available to cities. It's been in place since about the late 60s. The chart on this slide shows the LGA appropriations over the last 10 years. There have been a couple of changes recently. So the 2019 tax bill increased the aid by $26 million in 2020. The aid is set to increase an additional $4 million in 2021, then remain at that amount going forward. Next slide, please. So in the next 3 slides, I'll try to present a simplified overview of the LGA formula. So the goals of the LGA have changed over the years, and with changes to those goals, we often see changes to the formula that distributes the aid. So the last LGA formula change was happened back in 2013. And sort of the basic idea to how aid amounts are determined under the current formula is by this measure of unmet need. So unmet need for each city is determined by the LGA formula by first calculating a city's need, and there are a number of factors that go into determining how much need a city has, and those factors vary by the size of the city, and we'll talk about those on the next slide. But from that, a need amount is subtracted the city's ability to pay. And the city's ability to pay is just the product of the city's tax base times the average city tax rate. Next slide, please. So here are those need measures. So for small cities, the factors that go into determining the city's need are the population of the city and the population density within the city. For medium-sized cities, the factors that go into determining need within the LGA formula is the age of housing stock within the city, the household size within the city, the population decline the city has seen in recent years, and the population density. And finally, for larger cities, the factors that determine need include the age of housing stock, jobs per capita, and population density. Next slide, please. So once a city's need and ability to pay have been calculated, the LGA formula determines the city's unmet need. And if a city's unmet need is greater than its prior year aid amount, that city is going to get an increase in LGA. There is no maximum increase, but from one year to the next, aid can only increase by a certain percentage of the difference between unmet need and the need, or the amount of aid the city received in the prior year. So it's often the case that the increase won't fully get the city up to its unmet need amount. That may happen over a number of years. If a city's unmet need is less than the amount of aid it received in the previous year, the aid for that city will decrease. And there is a limit to how much a city can lose in LGA from one year to the next. And that limit is set at the smaller of 10 times the city's population, $10 times the city's population, or 5% of the city's levy in the prior year. Next slide, please. There's a smaller LGA program for townships that, after being eliminated, was reenacted back in 2013. This aid is just based on the product of the percent of net tax capacity within the township that is ag property, the total acres that make up the township, and the square root of the town's population. Once this product has been determined for each township, the aid amounts are adjusted proportionally so that the total overall aid amount is equal to $10 million. County program aid, or CPA, is sort of the LGA equivalent for counties. This is a general purpose state aid that is available to all counties. And like LGA, the CPA appropriation was increased by $26 million in 2020, and it's set to increase an additional $4 million in 2021, then remain at that amount going forward. Next slide, please. There are two different factors that determine a county's aid. One of those is a need measure, and the other one is a tax base measure. So the factors that go into determining need within the CPA formula include the age of residents within the county, the number of Part 1 or serious crimes within the county, and the number of households receiving SNAP benefits. And the tax-based portion of the formula is just based off of the county's tax base and the county's population. So Ms. Schill mentioned that there are state aids that the state uses to provide property tax relief. Another mechanism that's used for property tax relief is property tax credits. And one of the credits is highlighted on this slide here, and that's the agricultural market value credit. This credit is available to agricultural homesteads, just the land portion of agricultural homesteads. So this excludes that house, garage, and 1 acre of the homestead. And this is simply based off of the market value of the property. So the credit increases as the value of the property increases, and it maxes out at $490 for homes valued at $260,000 or more. The total state cost of this credit for credits paid in calendar year 2020 was $37 million. Next slide. Another credit is the school building bond agricultural credit. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the Ag to School credit. And this credit was established in 2017, and then it was amended by the 2019 tax bill. Again, this applies to ag land, excluding the house, garage, and 1 acre. The credit covers a certain percentage of a property's tax bill that is attributable to school building bond debt. So of the total tax bill applied to an agricultural property, if any portion of that is going to pay off school building bond debt, this credit reduces that amount. So the original percentage was 40%. The 2019 tax bill increased that up to 70% over 4 years. So the current, the credit amount for taxes payable in 2021 will be 55%. Next slide. There are a number of other credits and aids that we're not going to cover in detail in this presentation. It's good to know that they exist. They are under the purview of this committee. If you are looking for more information on any of these aids and credits or any of the aids and credits that we've talked about already, you can find them in the handout that Ms. Schill referenced at the beginning of the presentation. And now I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Williams, and he's going to talk a little bit about property tax refunds.
Next slide. Sorry, Chair Joachim and members. My name is Sean Williams from House Research Department. I typically staff individual income taxes for House Research, but I also staff the property tax refund program because, as I'm going to describe, it's a little bit different than some of the other property tax programs. So the property tax refund program, there's two programs. We've discussed them a little bit already, the Homestead Credit State Refund and the Renters Property Tax Refund. They provide property tax relief to both homeowners and renters who have property taxes that are high relative to their incomes. They're programs that are sort of based on setting a threshold percentage of your income, and the amount of a refund you get is equal to a percentage of the tax above that threshold, and then there's maximums established for everyone. These programs are a little bit different than some of the credits that Mr. Swanson has talked about already because These aren't applied directly to your property taxes and don't appear on your property tax bill. They're instead refunds that you apply for directly from the state. And so they come back to you sort of after the fact. Next slide, please. As you can see, total property tax refunds were about $719 million, and those are refunds filed in 2019. You can see that homeowners are a larger share of the program at $502 million, and renters are at about $217 million. And homeowners are also a larger number of total filers. Next slide, please. The program limits, those are adjusted for inflation each year. So for refunds to be filed in 2021, the maximum income that you can have to still qualify for a homestead credit refund is $116,180. And the maximum refund that you can receive under that program is $2,840. And those refunds scale down, the maximum refunds scale down as income increases. For the renters credit program, the idea behind this as a property tax program is that there's sort of an assumption made in law that a portion of the rent that renters pay represents property taxes. So statutorily, property taxes are assumed to be about 17% of rent. And then a similar formula is applied for renters as is applied for the homeowners. The maximum household income that can qualify for the renters credit is $62,960. And the maximum refund through the program is $2,210. Next slide, please. There's also a third property tax refund program that's a little bit different than the other two. This is specifically targeted at homeowners with more than increases in property taxes that exceed 12% in year over year. This is not an income tested program, so household income is not a factor in how much refund you get. And the maximum refund through the program is $1,000. For returns that were filed last year in 2019, there was $9.6 million in total refunds. This program is obviously relatively small compared to the other two, and it fluctuates quite a bit depending on the trends in property taxes statewide. And that's it for the property tax refund program. I'll hand it back to, I believe, Mr. Swanson.
Madam Chair, members, Jared Swanson with House Research. So there is one more property tax relief program that we want to touch on, and this is not an aid, a credit, or a refund. This is a separate tool that the state uses to provide property tax relief, and this is the Senior Citizens Property Tax Deferral Program. So the way this program works is that seniors 65 or older who have a household income of less than $60,000 and have lived in their home for at least 15 years can apply for a deferral of a portion of their annual property taxes. So participants in the program pay an amount of their property taxes that's equal to 3% of their household income, and the balance of their property tax bill is paid by the state. And this is not a credit or a refund, so the state treats this as a low interest loan, and that loan must be repaid before the owner of the home wants to transfer the title. Enrollment in the program would terminate if the homeowners died, if the homeowner sold the property, if the property was no longer the homestead of the owner, or if the owner just decided they no longer wanted to defer a portion of their property taxes. Next slide, please. So this chart illustrates the property tax burden by population quintiles, meaning each bar represents 20% of the state's population, with the first quintile representing the lowest earning 20% of residents, and the fifth quintile representing the highest earning 20% of residents. So the burden here is measured by effective tax rate, and in this case, effective tax rate is the tax paid divided by the taxpayer's income. So tax is said to be regressive if the effective tax rate falls as income increases. And you can see that the gross property taxes before any property tax refunds are paid, this is the case. So if the effective tax rate does fall from the first quintile to the fifth. But if you were to just look at the blue bars, this is the net property tax paid after the property tax refunds have been applied. It does mitigate some of that regressivity within the property tax. Next slide, please. So the next chart shows how much of the total net property tax each quintile pays. Again, these are the same quintiles, the 20% of the people within each group. The highest earning quintile, the fifth quintile, pays just over 50% of all property taxes, and those tax amounts, those tax percentages fall by quintile down to the first quintile, which pays just over 5% of the total property tax. And Madam Chair, I understand this is maybe a good time to take a few questions before we do the final portion of the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Swanson and Mr. Williams. Members, are there any questions on this portion? I see two hands raised. Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Joachim. The thing I appreciate, first of all, the presenters with the information here. It's very educational for me. One of the things is I was listening to the presentation, first of all, on the property taxes, and then taking a look at the refund program that's available for homeowners and renters. I feel like there's a bit of disparity that I'm starting to see here. And the way I'll call it out is it feels to me like as I take a look at a homeowner who's got a homestead versus a renter who's renting a house in one of the cities, a single family home. And if both properties are $200,000 each, the homestead person would pay an average of $2,350 in property taxes, if I saw the one chart earlier, and the renter would pay $2,921 in property taxes. And when I say that, I'm recognizing that the property taxes are part of the rent that they're paying. And so in theory, if the property taxes were lower, the rent would be lower. So I'm kind of operating off that philosophy there. So when I take a look at the property tax refund amounts that are out there, if people are homeowners applying, they have a wider income limit, and it feels like they get a bigger credit for property taxes that they would have paid directly, versus if somebody was a renter, it feels like, you know, they're already paying higher property taxes, but their income that they're able to get a credit on is substantially lower than what a homeowner is. And I'm taking a look at if somebody who owns a home is earning $57,000 a year versus a renter who is renting a property at that is $200,000 a year and has the same income at $57,000, the renter is actually having to incur more property taxes and less of a rebate that's going in there. My understand, you know, and maybe that's a little complex, but as I'm looking at it, that's what I feel like I'm seeing there. Is that somewhat of an accurate statement?
Mr. Swanson or Mr. Williams, who'd like to take that?
Chair Joachim and Representative Fisher, I think it's accurate to say that the property tax refund program for renters has a lower income threshold than the property tax refund program for homeowners. And then the homeowners program has a higher maximum than the renters program. So, and I think that if you go through and kind of the income brackets for the two programs aren't exactly the same, but I think that it's relatively more generous on the homeowner side relative to the renter side. And I think that Mr. Swanson can confirm, but the class rate paid by apartment buildings would be higher than the class rate paid by homesteaded single-family residence that's the homeowner owns. There's sort of a complicating factor in the math that you're doing because the renter's refund is not assessed or is not calculated based directly on the amount of property taxes paid by the unit or the building. It's instead based on this sort of assumed percentage of rent that represents property taxes, which is 17%. And so you kind of would have to do the math to see exactly, in terms of actual property taxes paid, how much the person is paying versus getting the refund. So it's a little bit more complicated calculation, I guess I'd say, but I think the general picture you're painting is accurate.
Mr. Swanson, did you have anything else to add? Representative Fisher, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just real, and that's, yes, I know it's more complicated, and that's what I was doing here is I was putting to pencil the rents would come out as the 17% figure, and that's how I backed into the income levels of the $57,275 and the percentage, and figuring at that point, the what we take a look as housing should be about 30% of a person's income. So I did all those kind of calculations and coming up with some of this, but I do know that there are other things that enter into the equation. But it does feel like we do give a as I'm listening to this, that if you own a home, not only do you get the interest rent, but you're going to pay less in taxes and you're going to get a bigger property tax refund than somebody who's a renter in the program, who a lot of times renters have not always, but renters are typically people who have got lower incomes than homeowners.
Thank you, Representative Fisher. Representative Gomez.
Well, Representative Fisher's point and question was actually a perfect segue, because what I wanted to ask was, Mr. Williams, if you could explain what the policy rationale is for the difference in those income phase out levels between renters and homeowners who are claiming the property tax refund. Like, is there any reason for it, or is it just something that happened somehow?
Mr. Williams.
Chair Joachim and members, I guess one disadvantage of having fewer longer tenured staff here than we've had in the past on the tax committee is that I can't really speak, I guess, to the kind of long-term decision making that's led to this sort of those disparities. I could offer to provide some maybe historical research to you on sort of how the two relative amounts have changed over time and how they compare. But I don't have any information, I guess, on the rationale that led to the legislature establishing different schedules for those two programs.
Representative Gomez, follow up?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I know we have an excellent team, but we lost a couple of our longer tenured staff up there over the last few years. So that would be great, just trying to understand kind of where that came from. I also have heard, honestly, I can't remember like where I've heard this, but I know that I don't believe that I've seen actual data on it. But I've heard that there are, based on their incomes and the amount of rent that they pay, there are a number of renters in Minnesota who don't claim the property tax refund because it is this freestanding, like separate form that you have to fill out. You have to get like the certificate of rent paid from your landlord. So that step has to happen. And then you have to kind of like wait till August, which is outside of the tax sort of time when we're maybe thinking about taxes more, back in April. And so I don't know if anybody tracks that, or if somebody has an idea about whether that's just like a thing that I heard / made up, or if that's for real.
Mr. Williams.
Chair Joachim and Representative Gomez, I just pulled up an old email that I've sent on this topic. I have numbers from the Department of Revenue that about 2/3 of the homeowners that are eligible for the homestead credit refund claim it. And they say that they don't have a firm number on the renters credit because it's a lot harder for them to get data on renters. But they have indicated to me in the past, the Department of Property Tax Research has, that they actually think that the participation in the renters credit is actually a little bit higher.
Representative Gomez, follow up?
That's great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Hertaus.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and to this interesting discussion about the renter's credit. Thank you, Mr. Williams, for pointing out that the difference in the calculation is based not solely on income for the homeowner. It's based on a formula based on the value and the tax assessed, where there's an assumption that the credits that are being issued at a given location in an apartment building is solely based on the incomes of those tenants. So I'm just curious, when you made that statement, has anybody ever studied whether or not there's actually more renters credit paid out on a particular apartment building based on the number of units and the occupants in it? Is there more credit paid out than actual property tax collected? It'd be an interesting thing to entertain.
Mr. Williams.
Chair Joachim and Representative Hertaus, I haven't seen that particular calculation, but I think that the Department of Revenue has done a historical study on what they assume to be the share of property taxes that is represented in rent. And I think the most recent study was from 2018, and they said statewide it was about 13.9%. So I think that there is some research that would indicate that the amount of property taxes that is the underlying assumption for the program is higher than the amount that's actually paid, but that's a couple years old. I would say it's unlikely that they've paid out more refunds than there were property taxes paid, just because the way that the program works, there's sort of thresholds and there's co-pays for the homeowners. So it seems like even with maybe a little bit high estimate of total property taxes in rent, you still would not get refunds exceeding property taxes paid. But I certainly am not aware of that on particular buildings or any sort of systematic way to study that.
Representative Hurtas, do you have a follow-up?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Williams. I knew that. I just wanted you to say that. But nonetheless, it appears that with the studies that have been done, we have been generous with regard to the renter's credit. There's been a lot of back and forth over the last many bienniums as to the percent that is assigned to the renter's credit. And as you mentioned, currently we're sitting at 17% for renter's credit, and the property tax being 13.9%. It's kind of the average yield. So I guess obviously it depends on location, and that's the 3 rules of real estate: location, 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 and that's where the taxes get assessed the highest on the most desirable locations, and not a lot of tax on some of the other ones. So certainly I've seen a broad disparity. You could take a home in a rural county in a nice town. I'll just grab one. Let's say it's Glencoe. And if you picked that house up and moved it into Edina, that very same home on the same lot, it would be assessed a much higher valuation. And yet, if the income wasn't dramatically different, if somebody was earning whatever, I think I'm trying to draw the correlation here is that the burden or distribution of property taxes is set at the local level, so they don't need to raise that much. But obviously, Chair Joachim's community, Hopkins, you'd see a much higher property tax on a small home in downtown or rural Hopkins or the city of Hopkins than you would if you moved it further out. So, it's a complicated system, and to all you freshmen that are new to the committee, welcome to the most challenging committee with regard to figuring out who pays their fair share.
Thank you, Representative Hurtas.
Madam Chair?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. No, it's not your fault. I don't have the raise hand icon here, so I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but if I could ask a question.
If it's not under participant, it could be under reactions if you have a newer Zoom model. So
okay.
Go ahead, Representative Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, the questions that are coming up are really good. I like to hear these questions because I've dealt with property tax